CEO of the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union, Treasurer Sister Carrie Ann King, Brother Trevor Kalushi, Director, Board of Directors and staff of the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union and its subsidiary Capital Financial, Dr. John Hunt, Mr. Glenville Lovell, our featured speaker, the Reverend Selvin Lowe, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the media. Good evening, and welcome to the 48th Annual Olive Trotman Memorial Lecture. My name is Joel Ford, and it's a pleasure to perform the role of moderator at this year's lecture. To give the invocation, I am inviting Credit Union member and rector of the All Saints Anglican Church, the Reverend Selvin Lowe, to the stage. Reverend Lowe.
Shall we bow our heads in prayer? Gracious God and Heavenly Father, we thank you for yet another opportunity which we come together here this evening for this memorial lecture. We thank you for bringing us here safely. We ask you, Lord, to bring all those who are on the way coming safely as well. And so as we go through this lecture, we bring before you Mr. Lovell, who will be our presenter this evening, our featured speaker. And we ask you, Lord, that he will not lean on his own understanding, but by everything you will place on him what he needs to say. We ask you, Lord, to bless him in a very special way, with knowledge, and hope, strength, and courage. And we pray that as we sit back and relax and listen, that we all be able to understand and endeavor. And now, God, we ask you now to be with us throughout this evening's proceedings. Allow your presence to go through and be with us. And now, as we place everything in your hands, Lord, we ask you to go before us in all our doings with your most gracious favor. Further us with your continual help, that in all thy work begun, continue and ended in thee, you may glorify your holy name. And finally, by your mercy, obtain everlasting life. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Lowe. As a courtesy to our speakers and all guests attending, please use this opportunity to put your cell phones on silent, and if necessary, please take your calls in the foyer just outside the room. Following the featured presentation by our speaker, there will be a brief question and answer session. And at the end of the evening, we invite all of you to remain for our post-lecture reception next door. I now invite the Treasurer of the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union, Sister Carrie Ann King, to give the welcome remarks. Sister Carrie Ann.
Fellow directors of the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited and its subsidiaries, elected officials, guest speaker Mr. Glenville Lovell, specially invited guests, management and staff, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and a warm welcome to the annual Olive Trotman Memorial Lecture. I am truly honored to perform this task of officially extending the welcome remarks on behalf of the Board of Directors of this credit union. The Olive Trotman Memorial Lecture provides a unique opportunity for our organization to achieve a diverse range of objectives. The primary goal of this lecture is to sustain and celebrate our origins. Sister Olive Trotman is a name synonymous with this establishment, and for many of us, we would never be cognizant of her contribution without attending this event. The credit union has embedded within its culture the commemoration of its existence annually. In so doing, this lecture has become one of the anchor activities within the anniversary month of May. This year, we worshiped on the actual anniversary date, May the 6th, at the Church of the Holy Trinity in St. Philip, conveniently coordinated as it also signaled the 10th anniversary of the opening of our branch at 6 Rosary in the same parish. It is important to recognize that this credit union continues to be a viable, relevant, and sustainable operation, and to this end, there has been an increased emphasis on accountability from our members and stakeholders. At this point, I would like to take the opportunity to congratulate all the members, voluntary representatives, staff, management, committees, and elected officials for their collective contributions through 48 years of operations. Maintaining these strides requires forward thinking with the aptitude to implement plans and anticipate outcomes, essentially, to be a leader in our own right. As a leader, we are responsible for inspiring, encouraging, creating hope and opportunity, and advocating to the mutual benefit of all stakeholders. Within this environment, it would be remiss of us to lose any opportunity to bring the needs of our members to any current discussion occurring at the national level. As such, we see ourselves as a preeminent supporter of the cultural and creative arts industry on the island, and we believe that there is an undisputed wealth of individual talent which exists. Yet the development structure, vision, and funding to place the sector in another stratosphere of continued sustainability and viability is still in the evolving phase. Given a conducive framework, this organization would be prepared to step forward to assist in advancing this cause and fulfilling the potential of the industry, in so doing, ensuring the creation of a universally accepted brand. This evening's lecture certainly highlights one of our locally treasured assets. Our featured speaker is the personification of the creative human capital authentically cultivated here in Barbados. We look forward to his presentation, coming from a voice and community which is starting to receive the visibility and respect it so rightly deserves. Ladies and gentlemen, I express our sincerest gratitude for your attention and time and invite you to thoroughly enjoy this evening's proceedings. Welcome, and I thank you.
Thank you, Sister Carrie Ann. I feel extremely grateful to be invited to perform this role on behalf of the credit union over the last several years. Each time, I'm completely blown away by the speakers, and I'm always reminded of a line from our national anthem to do credit to our nation wherever I go. And tonight's lecture in particular, I see the audience is filled with members and friends of the creative community, and more importantly, the featured speaker is a dear and beloved friend. I've read his books, and I heard a lady outside said, I hope you bring books to sell. So Glenville, I hope you got books to sell. I now invite Dr. John Hunt to the stage to introduce tonight's featured speaker.
Thank you, Master of Ceremonies, Reverend and all spiritual communities, President and elected officials of the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited and subsidiary Capita Financial Services Incorporated, management, staff, and members, especially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, and I want to acknowledge that this day is also very special as it is one of our poet laureates' birthday, Kamal Brathwaite. He's 91 years old this year. Glenville Lovell was born and raised in Parish Land, Christchurch, Barbados. He went to Providence Primary and Foundation Boys Secondary. In the USA, he attended City College of New York, receiving a BA in Mass Communications and Theater and a Master's in Arts and Writing. Mr. Lovell is the author of several novels, several short stories, and a number of prize-winning plays. His novels include Firing the Canes, published in 1995, Song of Night, 1998, Too Beautiful to Die, 2004, Love and Death in Brooklyn, 2005, and The Darkest Street, 2016. He has also written short stories, a collection of which is found in Going Home in Chains, 2012. 3 of his novels have been translated into German, Norwegian, and Hebrew. Some of his work can be found online at Amazon and other online sites. If he didn't bring in today, you know where to get them. A prolific playwright, Mr. Lovell won the 2002 Frank Collmer Literary Award for his play Mango Ripe, Mango Sweet, and several notable prizes since then. He has also written Purple Painted Sky, 1985, When Eagles Scream, 1986, Panama Silver, 1990, Debating Society, 1995, Going for Love, 2008, which played to a standing room only audience at Carifesta 10 in Guyana, Simone's Place, 2014, and On the Block, 2018. And if I'm lucky, I might be allowed to produce and possibly direct The New World Ruins of the Great House. Yes, sir? No? Perhaps. We'll talk about it. In recent times, his latest accolade is as the recipient of the Earl Warner Trust Lifetime Achievement Award for a contribution to performing arts in April 2018. Surrounded by sugarcane, shadows, and real magicians, Lovell grew up with storytelling all around him in kitchens, under flamboyant trees at night, and in rum shops. He spent as much time picking dunks and golden apples from his backyard as he did picking words from big people's mouths, as his grandmother used to say. Many of these stories turn up in his writing, whether they be novels, short stories, or plays. While Lovell now lives in New York and works in New York, his narratives are still fueled and inspired by his romance with his island home. His writing adds a rich voice to the contemporary scene. It is rooted in Bajan pride, rich in idealism about the goodness of the island and what it has to offer. It also successfully fills the void of works as it tells our stories and our situations honestly and with international appeal. His narratives remind us of ourselves in tangible and intangible ways. Lovell had toured the globe as a dancer before he became a writer. And this, he said in a recorded interview, built his confidence and self discipline. According to him, if desire and talent are the fuel, then discipline is the engine of success as a writer. I believe the years of training as a dancer also opened me up emotionally. Sometimes I might have a problem grasping the intentions of character I'm working. To try to get a sense of that character's physicality, I would get up from my desk and put the appropriate music on and just dance. Then I would sit down again and things would be so clear for that character. It makes me happy to know that Glenville sometimes resorts to music and choreography to help understand and develop his characters. Maybe he might resort to music and dance tonight, we don't know. But as a dancer myself, an actor in one of his plays, and a reader of some of his work, I believe it is these experiences that contributes to Glenville's characters having so much life, as the young people would say. They are very nuanced, very specific, fully human, and very relevant in the spaces they inhabit. Maybe as Glenville makes his presentation, you might see this emergence as he gestures, pauses, and weaves with his words images and scenes that capture our imagination, leaving us dancing and celebrating what is universally Barbadian in each and every one of us. Please welcome an accomplished son of the soil, a dancer, a writer, and storyteller of our generation, Mr. Glenville Lovell.
Good evening. CEO, President, and other elected officials of the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited and subsidiary Capita Financial Services, Inc., management, staff, and members, specially invited guests, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. You know, there's something that happens to old dancers when they get on a stage. You know, the spirits of their younger selves try to convince them that they still have a leap in them or a turn. So as I was walking up here, I was thinking, could I like just do a couple of chenets across there? Would I be able to make it to the end? But in the end, I said, you know, don't make a fool of yourself. Just stick to the script. Dance has always been an integral part of my life. In my transition from performing to literary arts, I developed certain rituals involving dance, which prepared my mind, body, and my spirit for the introspective process of writing. It all started when I was working on my first novel called Fire and the Canes, which I will talk a little bit more about later. But I discovered then that dance had the capacity to push my focus away from the external, thereby setting my imagination free. It happened purely by accident. I'd been working late one night on the novel and was growing more and more frustrated by my inability to find a solution to a fairly vexing problem in this novel. I needed to do a transition from one time to the next. It's, in essence, what we call a flashback. But I wanted it to be seamless, the way a dancer would do it. I didn't want it to be obvious that it was a flashback, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I got up and I started pacing. And then I started dancing. I'm not going to dance, though. Which, I tend to do, when I'm on my feet, as I think several people in here have seen me in the hallway just dancing because I do that all the time. And then something miraculous happened. I felt all the tension dissipate, which, isn't unusual because that's what dance can do. But my imagination became suddenly so free that I could see the characters in front of me, literally. And they were dancing too. And then after a few seconds, they all disappeared. But something remained in my imagination. I could see it. It was a mask. And I realized then that the element of transformation, the alchemy that I would use was this mask. The mask which brought these characters to me from the period in the past, I would use to go get them when I needed them in this transition. So I've used movement or dance since then to prepare me for the transition into my deeper consciousness, sort of an awakened subconscious state. And for those of you who meditate, you might appreciate that it's like meditation to help unlock your imagination. So even though I have sort of left dance sort of keeps me in its sort of in its womb. This conversation that I'm going to have with you tonight it's really a collection of intimate stories. By the end of it, you may see the connection, the thread that binds them all together. For those of you who don't, I'll give you my email address and you can send insults there, but don't give them to me here because I'm the typical, stereotypical sensitive artist and I cry easily. So you don't want to see that. Someone asked me, and I get this question actually often, when did I know that I wanted to become a writer? I answered not quite in the way they might have expected. I said, all my life, I was being prepared for this. My personality was such that I was predisposed to be introspective, self-reflective, with an eagerness to travel within my own mind, bringing along the flavors and the spices of my natural environment, letting them mingle in search of some clear vision of what or how I fitted into the grand scheme of things. But I think of myself more of a storyteller than a writer. And in my case, there really isn't much of a distinction, as my impulse is always to tell a story. One of the best things about being a storyteller is that there's an understanding that everybody has a story to tell. Not everybody wants to tell a story, but we all have a story to tell. It's buried deep, sometimes like gold. I have spent so much time digging for my gold that someone that I was in love with said to me once that it's hard to live with you because you don't live in the real world. You live in your head, daring anyone to enter. Um, I didn't know what to say to that because it was probably true. The good thing about that, of course, is that it's led me here to you for us to have this conversation, and to tell you my story of emerging, for what I call emerging from the chrysalis. And what does that really mean? It simply refers to any ritual of maturation or initiation. And while you're in the chrysalis, a dramatic transformation is supposed to take place, a dissolving of immaturity. So I'll tell you a story about an arrogant dancer who believed he knew everything because he was Bajan. And we all know Bajans know everything. Or as my late stepfather used to say, Bajans don't know the most. So he leaves Barbados and he goes to New York because he believes this is destiny. In his first year in New York, studying theater and communications and taking dance classes and performing, he's living this wonderful life. He lives in this place called International House. It's one of the most incredible places in New York for a foreign student because it's essentially a student dorm for international students or American students who have some talent or aptitude that they could bring to this rich and extraordinary collection of international students. So there's students there from Africa, the Middle East, South America, Europe, Asia, Australia, and there's one or two from the Caribbean. He's the only Bajan in this place for sure, because it's really a very expensive place, and he only managed to get in because he agreed to teach dance classes 2 or 3 days a week. This place is really like Shangri-La in the sense that it has its own pub in the building downstairs. It has its own club for dancing because you can't be a student unless you party and drink. And it has like several areas where, living room areas where you can have conversation, and in this environment where you have countries, people from countries who are at war with each other, a lot of these conversations got very contentious. So this Bajan dancer is very much at home because, Bajans love a good argument. So this atmosphere of intellectual froth has him feeling very happy about his decision to leave New York. So he fell in with this group of African and Caribbean students because heaven forbid that in this environment he strayed too far away from the expected group, because there's still cliques, everywhere you go you find cliques. So even as a diversified environment, there's still all these different groups that are clicking together. The few times he tried to explore other cultures, he got disdainful glances and was subjected to stares from the Caribbean women whenever they saw him talking with a non-black woman. So he tucked his tail between his legs and settled in with a very politically savvy Trinidadian woman. Anyway, one evening, he joins the conversation in progress among this ragtag collection of students from the African diaspora. A brother from Ghana who was studying economics asked him what kind of music he listened to. So he eagerly rattles off various genres of music he liked: reggae, jazz, R&B, rock, classical. The African brother stopped him and said, when you say classical, what do you mean by classical music? So the Bajan says, well, what do you mean, classical music? There's only one classical music, classical music. The African brother says, well, I am from Africa, and classical music to me is drums and instruments like the kora and the counting. Is that what you mean by classical music? So the Bajan, he laughs. He says, well, what do you mean? You gotta be crazy, man. That's not classical music. Classical music is violins. What's wrong with you? Where'd you come from? You know classical music? So There was a long silence. For the next few minutes, this Bajan dancer endured a dismantling of his supercilious, Eurocentric worldview and his ignorance of African culture. So the African brother says, "So I know you're conditioned to look at the world with white eyes," he said. But see, African classical music, it may be undocumented in the West, but it embraces traditions which have their roots in the origins of all civilization. In Africa, see, we use music in sacred ceremonies and rituals. In Africa, he says, music is the linchpin between the world of the ancestors and that of the living. See, words like tradition and tribal that you see being thrown around for African music, that's just to marginalize our music. But to us, to Africans, our music is as classical as a ray of sunshine. So you need to find your African song, my Barbadian brother. So it was the first time this Barbadian had come face to face, literally, with irrefutable evidence of his ignorance of Africa. But it also underscored something. It underscored his parochial concept of the arts. The next day, the African student showed up at his dorm with a cassette tape of classical music and a book full of mask and different initiation rites. And if it's not apparent by now, that Bajan dancer was me. And I began writing again that night. It's sort of what I consider the entering of my chrysalis phase. It was a one act at the time, but I later rewrote it to a full-length play, and I showed it to Earl Warner, the late brilliant director, who I'd known, I'd met years before because he used to work backstage for the Barbados Dance Theatre Seasons of Dance. His response infused me with the confidence and really unmasked my latent desire to be a writer. He said to me, "Glenville boy, I don't know what you're going to do with the dance thing, but see, you are a writer." That's what he said to me. And that comment, that directive, it sent me on a personal and professional discovery as I developed the voice which produced the play which we just recently did at the Daphne Joseph Hackett Theatre. But before that, I chanced upon a 4-part documentary on PBS, a public TV station in New York, about the construction of the Panama Canal. It totally blew my mind. Every minute of it was riveting. I mean, the notion of cutting through, dissecting this rainforest to join the two largest oceans would have been enough to hold my fascination, but the added attention to how and why the Caribbean became involved in the construction, and in particular, the approach to recruiting Barbadians made it absolute must-watch TV for me for every night that it showed. I got what amounted at the time to a first-hand account of what life was like for Bajans who went to work on the Panama Canal. Because in this documentary, they interviewed a number of Bajan men still living in the canal, they weren't working there, of course, who actually worked on the construction. All of them were in the 80s and over. There was actually one guy who was close to 100. But they were still very, very sharp and funny in recounting what life was like. The first thing that impressed me about these men was that they had not lost their Bajan accents. You know, how is it that we get a few people who go to New York for a weekend and come back speaking Yankee, and these men left Barbados when they were teenagers, 16, 17. never returned from Panama to Barbados, and they talk like they were from Penny Hole or My Lord Sill. Well, it's not Penny Hole anymore, right? It's called Gemswick. Yeah. So don't throw any stones at me, because I keep forgetting that the name is strange. You know, they lamented about not going back to Barbados, of course, because they miss. But in the spirit of adventure that had led them there, they were happy with what they had accomplished in the face of the hardships. And except for a few moments which were tinged with sadness, the pride in their voices at being present in history during the creation of what is now called the seventh wonder of the world was always there, always present. A few of them actually cried during the interview because they didn't think that they got the just reward or recognition for what they'd done. There were the heroes who'd been left out of the parade. They believed that they'd been forgotten by the wayside of America's march into history and its thirst for bragging rights as the most powerful nation on earth. But as I embrace the moments of melancholy triggered by watching these grown men express the pain in their soul, I realized that their pain wasn't just for the lack of recognition of what they did in Panama. It was the pain that comes with the realization that you have no voice, no power to create an alternative narrative. It was the pain that comes with knowing that the historical monument which you helped build will not have your name, and that the history of the Panama Canal construction would only reference you in the footnotes. They did everything that was asked of them. Work long hours, work when sick, work when hungry without complaining. They acted right. They acted right. They acted right with the hope that if they did what was asked of them, they would be taken care of. You see, acting right is something that we've always been expected to do as Barbadians. Perhaps it was a compulsory condition imposed by those who enslaved our ancestors in order for us to get the rudiments of livelihood. You have to act right. And over time, over history, it became embedded in our subconscious, that need to act right. At the completion of the documentary, having been by turns shocked, awed, mesmerized, and exalted by what I saw, I began to wonder, how could I have completed my entire high school education in Barbados with no real knowledge or sense of the magnitude of what these men and women had done in Panama, and in turn, the cumulative effect on Barbadian society? Where were those voices when I was in school in the history lessons? Where are these voices? Where were these voices in our legends, our myths, our stories? Why weren't we celebrating them as the mythic characters they are? And so, many years later, I wrote a play. It's called Silver Web. It's actually called Panama Silver now, but the original name was Silver Web. It's the story of a Barbadian family, two brothers and a son in the canal zone during the construction. In it, I tried to synthesize a lot of what I got from that documentary. The hopes, the despair, and the longing, and also to show how it altered everyone involved. That play was directed by Earl Warner in 1989, but like most stories, the seed for Silverware had been planted in me long before, even before I saw the documentary. And it just was there in my subconscious, waiting for the right manure. See, Silver Web, the play, could not have been written without the experiences of a few other things. When I was a boy, there was this man, a shoemaker. His name was Ben Jacob. He was somewhere in his 70s, and he had one leg. The other one was amputated somewhere above the knee. He was a pugnacious fellow, feisty. He didn't have a lot of patience with people. There was a fire that burned in him, which I was too immature at the time to understand. But the story went that Ben had lost his leg in the Panama Canal. At the time, to me, the Panama Canal was just some man-made lake. There may have been references to the people who had gone there, which I heard growing up. But I treated the references to the Panama Canal the same way I treated references to Millie who'd gone to Brazil. Poor Millie. The connection between that folk song and murder and the fact that Bajans had actually emigrated to Brazil didn't come until much later. But as a concrete signpost in our history, there was nothing marking Panama Canal as of importance to me at that very young age. The story of Barbados in the Panama Canal had not been fully synthesized into our culture. And so when I heard about Ben losing his leg in Panama, I said, poor Ben. Another ingredient in the synthesis of that Panama Canal story for me happened in 1979. That year, I was part of Barbados' performing contingent at Carifest in Cuba. I was a dancer in that show. And while sitting in the theater waiting to rehearse for one of our performances, I got into a conversation with a couple of people hanging around the theater. When I told them I was from Barbados, they couldn't believe it. It's like they were ecstatic. They wanted to dance. It was jumping all over the place. So what's going on? So, well, our parents are from Barbados. How is that possible? So, well, some of them traveled to Cuba from Panama after the canal was built. I was like, wow, this is stories that I'd never heard before. So when I sat down to write Silver Web, these experiences which had been locked away came rushing back as reference points for the play. And at the end of the play, the family splits up. One returns to Barbados. He had lost a hand, while the son gets on the boat for Cuba, and the other brother remained in Panama. But after finishing that play about the lives of Barbadians workers in the Panama Canal, I realized that as much as I love theater, at some point I would need a larger canvas to create stories which needed to be told, stories which unearthed and confronted our buried past. But I knew that a level of transformation had already taken place in my imagination. The only question was, where would it take me? And what would be the next level of my transformation in the chrysalis of my imagination? From the time humans learned to make signs and communicate, stories had been used to teach and to entertain. When I was young, somewhere around 8 or 9, I used to sit in the corner or hide under the table in my mother's dark kitchen because we didn't have electricity at the time. So it was lit by one single lamp on a wobbly table. But I would listen to her and her friends recreate incidents of their lives, embellishing them for each other's pleasure and also as a form of spiritual healing and communal bonding. This was perhaps my first intimate contact with storytelling and myth-making. That is the creation of archetypes for passing on beliefs and customs that can heal and energize the spirit. As a storyteller, my primary purpose is to tell a story which entertains. Now, I know I just said that, stories can be used to teach and to heal. But if it does not entertain, in my opinion, other writers may not agree, but in my opinion, if it does not entertain, the subliminal message that you think or the force that you want to impact in the story might not reach the mark. But there's also an intensely personal and selfish journey which I think any storyteller or any artist embarked on when they dig into their psyche for elements to enliven a story or to make it worthy of your time, because your time is precious. And that is the discovery of something new, something hidden about yourself, also about your culture. And the search is what drives, in me, the creative process. Now, many people may disagree about the value and importance of art, and I was happy to hear that this organization sees the importance of arts. But one thing we can all agree on is that there's something really deeply moral about art. And in my case, the novel or the drama, or in my previous life, dance. I've heard it said that writers write about things they fear or about things they don't understand. So following this theory, writing for me serves as a conduit to discovery. There's another element. It's also a deliverance from a kind of fear. Because if you challenge yourself, and not just in writing, but if you challenge yourself to dig really deep beneath the surface, you can develop a kind of self-confidence which no pessimist can destroy. And it is that triumph that you can find something universal in your personal story. And in turn, you, the reader, by embracing the stories and retelling them, you become filled with that self-confidence which comes from knowing that you are rooted in a specific history with all its warts and scabs, knowledge which slays any cultural marauder's attempt to marginalize, oppress, or dehumanize you. I was watching the rededication for Dalton Bishop, Jackie Opel, not too long ago on the internet. One of the speakers, I think it was Mark Williams, made a comment about always examining the past to find ways to go forward. And I was struck by that. See, one of the things I realized as I was growing up, and this may have built up a reservoir of desire in me, which I finally found expression when I discovered the arts. But one of the things I was very conscious of growing up was that there was this fear that the people around me had of the past, or of certain aspects of the past. See, I've come to the conclusion, though, that this is a symptom of a strategical enforced amnesia. It's a malady born, I think, of people who are not used to hearing their voice echo in the night, other than cries of pain. It's a malady born in people who've never howled to the moon and hear the moon howl back with an emphatic celebration of their will. It's a malady born in people whose voices have been trampled and who've been reduced to whispers, albeit whispers of hope. Perhaps for that reason, I've always felt the pull of the past. And I believe as a writer, I'm profoundly influenced by it. And this brings me to another novel, or this is the first novel I wrote, Fire in the Canes. Two of the governing symbols of Caribbean history are slavery and the plantation system it spawned. And these unquestionably inhumane institutions energize the evil cousins of oppression and physical brutality, racial antagonism, color discrimination, class prejudice, you can go on and on. Any one of these themes would generate volumes of novels. And if you add on to that the presence of this population that were exiled and cut off from their origins in Africa and Asia and Europe and saddled with trying to fit all these cross-current cultures, you have the genesis of chaos, which is good for any writer. See, writing is a process of cataloging your inner and external experiences. There are things that enter your psyche that frame the language you use, the images you carry, and over time you begin to use or to see these things or see life through this spectrum. So that when somebody from outside comes to the Caribbean, for instance, and they make a movie or a love story about, with the Caribbean as a background, they will never capture the essence of Africa that rules our destiny, because they never listen to the lament of women walking home in the dark after a long day on the plantation. They haven't heard women confide in each other during the rainstorm, that a spirit came to Clarice, the hairdresser, and tell she don't leave the house that morning. And she did and never came back. They never heard women tell their children that if they walk in the street and they see Beresford the carpenter in front of them, and he stops and moves to a side, that they should stop, because that means the spirit is passing. My first novel, Fire the Canes, draws on these myths and stories told by my mother in their kitchen when I was a boy. And by expanding on these stories, I hope to reawaken memories of ancient places, to give them psychological force, which my mother and her friends instilled in me. I tried to give these characters psychological and spiritual realities and allow them to breathe new life in me, with the hope that they may awaken new feelings in others as well. Fire in the Canes, the novel, is about a village at the turn of the 20th century looking to move on from the legacy of slavery, but which has no firm grasp of their past. And there's this one character, his name is Prince Johnson. He's a descendant of an African wood carver who makes masks that are imbued with magic. And Prince has this ability to be a shapeshifter. And he produces two children who also have this ability to suspend time and bridge the gap, which allows the village to receive this revelation from the ancestors about their past, which finally allows them to move on. It's a novel of memory and about the longing and about joining fragments of history to create new and dynamic whole. See, the conceit of that novel is that the past is alive and there's no reason to fear it. You may ask, well, what's the point of mining the past? I used to be one of those people. I call them the afraid. You see, we all have some concept of how Africans came to be here in this part of the world. You know, caught in webs of deceit, dragged across the Atlantic, raped, dehumanized, languages stolen, customs stolen, etc. The intimate details require further investigation by the historians. But there's another quotient. There's a cosmic quotient to these stories that I don't think have been told. And that's the space where artists will have to work to reclaim the fragments of forgotten rituals which still linger in the air, floating on the melancholy of our ancestors' cries. forgotten songs buried in the bones of our ancestors that are congealed in the coral around these islands. We, the artists, must use our gifts of storytelling to embolden our brothers and sisters to help gather and reassemble these fragments. But to assemble these fragments, we will need a special glue. And that glue is the compressed resolve which comes out of the acknowledgement of our shared pain and the promise that lives in the new awareness. And in a strange way, that is the process of creating stories, the making of something original from different particles. The irony of our presence here in the Caribbean basin is that no one can really claim to know where the past ends and the present begins. But you have to believe as an artist that if you examine your own heart, listen to the rhythm, if you go into yourself and be unafraid to reveal what you've seen there, that your voice will speak to others. And in so doing, unshackle each of us ever so slightly from our fears. As the poet Yeats said, if we understand our own minds and the things that we are striving to utter themselves through our minds, we move others, not because we have understood or thought about these things, but because all life has the same root. And this brings me to the act which signaled that I was developed enough to emerge from the chrysalis. And it's the actual writing of Fire in the Canes. The genesis of that novel is a dream that I had. It was the image of a woman walking with her eyes down on the ground, searching for something. And in the dream, I come up on this woman and I asked her, well, what are you searching for? And she says, I'm searching for those who are afraid. But that's all she says, nothing more. For some reason, this dream, it haunted me for a long time, and I knew there was something I needed to investigate. It posed questions that I had no rational answers for, but I knew the answer was buried somewhere deep in my subconscious, in my imagination. And though it didn't make the final copy of the novel, that's how I started Fire in the Canes. A woman walking along the back road with her head down, searching, but instead of me, she comes upon an old man and he says, well, what are you searching for? And she says the same thing, I'm searching for those who are afraid. And he says, I know them. I know their story. So he takes her into this little shack filled with plants and his roots hanging all over. And he begins to tell her this story about an African who built masks, who had magical properties with the mask, and about his pregnant wife and how he got killed, but the wife survived, and so on, till we got to Prince Johnson. But as I was interrogating the theme of that story, I realized that I was one of the afraid, which is why I got the dream. And that I was raised in a country afraid to confront and embrace history. What we've done is construct a psychology of denial, amassing a growing weight on the shoulders of each successive generation. And in my formative years, there was no narrative of freedom from which we could draw communal strength or share our collective grief. And as a nation, we have completely chosen insomnia over resurrection. One of the things that I really felt when writing Fire in the Canes was that the sense that the spirits were speaking to me, they were whispering things to me. And much of that novel was written in the early hours of the morning before daybreak when some vision or dream had woken me up, compelling me to write. It made me a believer in the concept of ancestral memory. And as I got deeper and deeper into the novel, into the writing, I realized that my writing, my act of writing, was an acknowledgement of the terrible toll that slavery, even though it had occurred many, many hundreds of years before my birth, had taken on my own psyche. Life, as we know, is the process of reconciling oneself to one thing or another in order to move on to some path which we hope will be happier than the one we left. Our dreams are made of our desires and our fears. So in my own imagination, this was what was happening. There's an African novelist and thinker, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who said, "Imagination is the greatest democratic equalizer." I will add to that, it is also the path to spiritual freedom. And what does spiritual freedom mean? Or what does it bring? It brings confidence, not to be confused with arrogance. In our country, see, slavery's toll is buried lives, buried stories. We all need to take responsibility for them. All of us. Generations have been rendered invisible in history, by history in this country. And some of their offspring are just as invisible and powerless today in a society, in a country that they helped to build. We must breathe the conviction in ourselves to explore and interpret that history without fear. And so, brings me to what I think, or what I hope you may have gleaned from the stories I've told, and that is that the imagination is at the center of our liberation. The imagination is the spirit. That's the spiritual element in creativity and the voyage in the mind. Imagination can point us to the truth beyond reason. See, in our stupor, in our self-congratulatory comparison to other islands we consider less developed, we do not see the wounded warriors in our own backyard until it's too late. Creativity is an engine of innovation. Apart from the arts, creativity simply means finding ways to follow your own natural curiosity, which leads or which can lead or develop some goal, which in turn can lead to a level of spiritual upliftment and inspiration to others. Each of you have that capacity to be creative, to inspire each other, to find the creative force within you to improve your own life and the lives of those around you. It does not have to be writing or singing or dancing or acting or art or painting. It could be baking. But you just need to tap into your emotional and your passion, because that is the source of creativity. So the mission, therefore, is for all of us, especially artists, and more specifically the new generation, to find ways to recultivate or reimagine our cultural genealogy to reflect our unique gifts, with the accent on bringing forth our unique creative spirit to enrich our daily lives. And I will leave you with one last story. About 3 years ago, I was approached on Facebook by a young Barbadian young lady who was studying in a university in the States. She was on an athletic scholarship. And she asked me, well, when are you going to write another Fire in the Canes? I said, well, there's only one Fire in the Canes. I can't write another one. She says, well, you need to write another book like that. I said, well, I can't. Well, why are you? She said, well, I don't read at all. I couldn't finish a whole book. I would start and I would stop. I couldn't finish a book. But one day I saw Fire in the Canes lying around, my sister's copy, and I picked it up. She said, I was 16 at the time, and I just read that book all the way through. I finished it, and I read it again, and I realized that for some reason the book, it just seemed to be about me, even though it was written about people who lived, at the turn of the 20th century. All of the characters I seemed to know them. They seemed to know me. I just felt like I was awakened in that book. And so that's my message to you. Let's stay awoke. Thank you. Well, I think that because you may have a stark visual from which to draw inspiration, it does not detract from the requirement that you use your imagination, because when you begin to think of storytelling, um, you're also, I believe, imparting or giving a piece of yourself to the story. And that you can only get by using your imagination, by going into yourself and searching for what is stored there. So you may get stories or you may get inspiration from things that happen in front of you, happen on a daily level, but it's just going to be a story if you don't use your imagination to connect it to something else. It has to be deeper, and if you don't do that, then what you will report or what you will reproduce will have no depth. So I think that you can never um, underscore the importance of the imagination, and you cannot get away from having to use it if you want to do something original. So if you want to copy and do what everyone else is doing, yeah. But if you want to find something that's different, that's new, that speaks about and to you or to people whose stories you want to tell, you still have to use your imagination. Right, is a writer born? That is an age-old question. I think a writer is born and a writer is made. You're born to do whatever your passion guides you to do, and if it's writing, then you'll find it. But you also have to work at it. It's a craft, like anything else. You're not going to be a great writer just because you decide you're going to be a writer. You have to study great writers. You have to read a lot, and you have to also have an appreciation of your spirit, because you have to listen to it. And you also have to be aware. I mean, it's about awareness. That's really what it is. It's seeing. It's a way of seeing, a way of being guided and looking. These are the elements that I've used, I think, to help me to develop my craft. But you have to work at it. It's not a it's not something you can just think you can do because you know you feel it. You can. You have to work at it. I think if anyone has ever seen any of my plays, they will tell you that there's a lot of comedy in it, because that's part of life. Life is not totally serious. It's not totally comedy. I write about people, and people's lives are crazy. People's lives are chaotic. There's humor and there's laughter and there's pain and there's tears. So I do it all. I don't try to, you know, say I'm just going to write light. I'm going to write heavy. I write about people.
I'm going to ask you to remain on the stage, and I'm going to invite Sister Julie Corbin, a director of the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union, to make a presentation to you.
On the behalf of the Board of Directors of Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited, Capital Financial Services Inc., and Capital Insurance Brokerage, I wish to extend our heartfelt appreciation, a small token of our appreciation to a man with a big imagination. Words cannot express how honored we are to have you at this annual lecture this evening.
I think I may have to dance after all. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is really lovely. Wow. I don't think I want to leave Barbados. I'm supposed to go back to New York tomorrow, but I think I'm going to have to stay here. Jeez. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenville Lovell. We're now at the close of another lecture, but to offer the vote of thanks, I invite Brother Trevor Colucci, who's also a director of the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited, to the podium. Brother Colucci?
Thank you, Master of Ceremonies. Good evening to all. I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this memorable occasion. Let me first start by giving glory to the Almighty God for making tonight's occasion a resounding success. First and foremost, I thank our featured speaker, Mr. Glenville Lovell, for the diversity he has brought to the Olive Trotman Memorial Lecture Series. I think it is important that our culture icons and Barbadian griots are given a platform to present their journey. I know that despite his busy schedule, he has found time to grace this occasion. Thank you again for your insight and reflection. By the way, Mr. Lovell is an old Scholar Foundation boys like myself. Thank you, Reverend Selvin Lowe, a member of our credit union, for agreeing to offer the invocation and the blessings to our lecture. My heartiest thanks to our beloved GCEO, Ms. Aline, and her team for their work behind the scenes, researching and selecting another wonderful speaker. Again, thank you so much. I would also like to congratulate our credit union for continuing to keep Sister Olive Trotman's memory alive in this forum. Thanks to Sister Carrie-Ann King, our treasurer, for her welcome remarks and her reminder to us on our road to offer active service. Thank you, Dr. John Hunt, for introducing the speaker and for sharing with us your impression of him. We thank Sister Julie Corbin for graciously making the presentation to our speaker as a show of our appreciation. We extend our appreciation to the events production team, SM Events, Renaissance Designs, IGM Stage Lighting, Creative Vibes, Mr. Tempro, and all good hearts, too many to mention, who work behind the scene. We thank you for lending your event expertise to our function. We acknowledge and thank the team here at the Lloyd Erskine Sandifer Center for hosting and providing the refreshments which we shall soon enjoy. I would like to acknowledge and thank Joel Ford, our moderator, for another year. We appreciate your high level of professionalism while carrying out your role. Last but not least, I would like to thank our audience for accepting our invitation and gracing us with your presence. I thank the members of the media for your evincing interest in covering the event. Finally, I leave you with this inspiring quote by Martin Luther King. An individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concern to the broader concerns of humanity. Once again, I thank you for your attention, for without you tonight would have not been a success. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining with the Credit Union family and being part of this very special lecture and celebrating the 48th anniversary of the Credit Union. We invite you to stay for the post-lecture cocktail reception featuring the Young Barbadian Jazz Group led by Akeem Burke. It's certainly been my pleasure being your moderator this evening. If you can't stay with us, please travel safely. Enjoy the rest of your evening.